My name is Jenna Abrahamson, and this project revolves around the idea of renewable energy sources and, more specifically, the use of biofuels when it comes to energy production in an energy demanding world. To begin with, let me address the present day problems that make this conversation necessary. From November 30th to December 11th, 2015, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change took place and established an international agreement on climate change to keep global warming below 2 degrees Celsius. Each country was responsible for coming up with their own plan to reduce the effects of climate change. This shows how we're finally taking responsibility for climate change on a national level. Now, what about the possibility of biofuels when it comes to energy production? With climate change finally being acknowledged as a threat to biodiversity as well as human well-being, countries are looking at the idea of biofuels. Scientist Robert McDonald analyzes this in his article, Energy Sprawl or Energy Efficiency. He claims that biofuels have the greatest cumulative aerial impact of any production technique. Moreover, the data displayed within the article shows the different land use intensities between different energy sources, further proving how much additional land biofuels use. Scientist John Wines also comments on this idea, saying that the development of renewable fuel alternatives such as biofuels can create conflicts with biodiversity protection. This is rooted in the fact that both biodiversity and biofuels require land. Moving forward, this chart shows how when you consider biofuels, you also have to consider contributing factors such as energy security, costs, climate change, and rural economics. Overall, this chart displays the idea that everything is connected and you can't do just one thing. With this in mind, Wines emphasizes how we need to do some comprehensive accounting of the costs and benefits when it comes to biofuels, as well as other competing land uses. In a like manner, scientist Joseph Fargione talks about how the cost of land clearing and the carbon that is subsequently released from that process may not be worth it when it comes to food crop-based biofuels. However, there may be another option. If biofuels are used in an attempt to help mitigate climate change, then perhaps growing native perennials on degraded and abandoned agricultural land could be a possibility. That way, the process of land clearing could be avoided. Scientist Jason Hill developed a way to evaluate these different biofuel options. He claims that in order to be a viable alternative, it needs to provide a net energy gain, have environmental benefits, be economically competitive, and be producible in large quantities without reducing food supplies. He then used this criteria to evaluate both corn grain ethanol and soybean biodiesel, and found that biofuels would provide benefits if their biomass feedstocks were producible with low agricultural input, on land with low agricultural value, and required low input energy to convert feedstocks to biofuel. Expanding upon this idea, scientist David Tillman discussed the carbon emissions of biofuels and determined that they can either be carbon neutral, carbon negative, or carbon sources. Both corn and biodiesel are carbon sources, which means they have a net increase in greenhouse gas emissions. However, low-input, high-diversity biofuels are carbon negative, providing a hopeful option for the future. As you can see from this chart found within the article, low-input, high-diversity prairie bioenergy on degraded soil provides large amounts of greenhouse gas reductions. Now, let's say for argument's sake that we're going to grow corn in the state of Minnesota with the sole purpose of using it for biofuel production. How much energy could we actually generate? I decided to make a heroic corn estimate and sacrificed all the land in Minnesota except for developed, protected, forest, water, and steppe areas in order to grow corn for the production of biofuel, as seen in this ArcGIS model. This led to the creation of a map which shows where I would grow corn and where I wouldn't grow corn in the state of Minnesota. Now this represents about the maximum amount of corn the state of Minnesota could produce. Taking that into consideration, there are about 137 billion gallons of gasoline consumed in the U.S. each year. In my GIS model, my heroic corn growth would result in approximately 3 billion bushels of corn. This is equivalent to about 6 billion gallons of gasoline, which is enough gasoline to supply approximately 5% of the U.S. Overall, the production of biofuels can produce a fair amount of energy, but it isn't the most efficient of resources and requires large amounts of land. Low input, high diversity biofuels can provide some hope, but perhaps it's time we consider other renewable resources, such as the possibility of solar or wind. In the end, it's an undeniable fact that we need to start looking to new resources and technologies in order to combat the devastating effects of climate change. The fate of the world and all of its inhabitants are in danger, and it's up to humanity to take responsibility for our actions and put an end to our own self-destruction.